And now for our final session, we're going to ironically end with the beachhead. So Whyte's going to take us through the role that business aviation has in accelerating SAF. So if him and his panelists could make his way up, I see Kennedy appearing from the corner and everyone else is slowly making their way up, so you won't be on him for long.
Hi, I'm Alasdair Whyte. I work with Oscar and Fayaz on SAF Investor, but I also spend a lot of my time as a journalist writing about corporate jets, and before that I spent 15 years writing about airlines and particularly airline finance. And I think there's a view in the room that corporate jets are much sexier, much more interesting and much more fun than the airline market. And it's completely right. And so we're absolutely delighted with to have 4 experts on this panel, and I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. So Andrew, would you like to go first?
Great, thanks so much. I'm Andrew Thomas from Vista Jet. For those who don't know us, we're a private jet operator with 270 aircraft covering 96% of the world, flying to 2,400 airports, so global coverage.
Mike?
Hi, my name is Michael Walsh. I'm a special advisor to a startup, blending startup in Singapore called FlyORO, but my background has been in business aviation for 25 years.
Toby?
Thanks, Al. I'm Toby Edwards. I'm co-CEO of Vista. We're a global on-demand private jet charter company, and we would arrange circa 8, 9, 10 flights every day all over the world.
And also pioneer in offering SAF to business jet customers. Sorry, Kennedy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kennedy Ricci. I'm the president of FlyORO. We do sustainability solutions and consultancy into private aviation as our main focus. We work with people on using offsets, using SAF, contrail mitigation, regulatory compliance, really a full service suite. So since we launched the business 5 years ago, we've offset either through using offsets or SAF about 1.5 million flight hours.
Brilliant. Kennedy, starting with you, I think there's a view in the room that private jets are all about billionaires flying around the world. Is that fair?
Well, I think so. There's a really diverse market out there. I think it's been interesting for us because we work with a lot of different operator types, customer profiles, and what we've seen is a different profile emerge within the US versus Europe versus Asia. So in the US, it's very much a corporate focus. This is a corporate sustainability push. So when companies have their own aircraft, they're looking at how they can decarbonize that, because for many of them, if they're software, financial services, insurance, the private aircraft is actually their biggest source of emissions. And so when they have to publicly report their emissions, now this is front and center to them. So those are the ones that we see, putting in some very aggressive SAF targets. So it's small volumes, but on a percentage basis, we've got customers that are doing 80%, 100% blended SAF today because they want to reduce that impact and be able to show that against their public disclosure of emissions. We see that some family offices as well, but that corporate is really the primary target within the US. On the European side, it's much more about compliance with the regulations. So we've got something that lifts all boats. I think it goes back to the carrot versus stick discussion yesterday. In the US, it's about companies that want to take advantage of incentives. In Europe, it's about how do we comply with what we need to do. So we've seen that emerge differently, that profile. I think everybody has this impression that the ability to pay is infinite. It's not. There is definitely a higher willingness to pay, but not an infinite ability to do so. So I think what we want to understand is how can we leverage business aviation demand, a premium customer in the market, especially at this stage of SAF, to help get to larger volumes, get to better economies of scale, and help things scale up by leveraging this today.
And roughly how much fuel does the business aviation, by the way, we've done no preparation for this panel, roughly how much fuel does the business aviation fleet burn compared to airlines?
So I think globally it's about 80 billion gallons of jet fuel. Business aviation is about 2% of that, so 1.6 billion gallons, I think.
That's good maths. That was a really honest answer. I was expecting you to say these are all business tours, and then I was going to go, Andrew, how many dogs does Vista Jet carry in a year?
We really should have prepared for this panel. I don't know, but we did an analysis, I think it was back in 2022, wasn't it? That 1 in 4 flights had pets on board. So not necessarily just dogs, cats, birds, anything really.
Ferrets.
Not sure on that one.
But take us through Vista Jet. You've got a big fleet. How important is SAF to your customers?
It's really important for everyone. I mean, we started off with our journey in 2020 with carbon offsetting, because you need to start somewhere. And then SAF, really, 2022, we used 200,000 gallons. Last year, we used 4 million. So for us, it's about scaling up the SAF. It's not just relying on offset. SAF is really the key, as we all know. That's why we're all here, to use that. I do think we're slightly nascent in our industry, both commercially and in the private aviation sector, because we're waiting for the customers to be experts. I think it's for us to inform our customers and include it in our product offering, which we do.
And how often do you have customers saying to your sales team, and Vista's an interesting model where people buy block. You have customers, you have corporate customers and individuals who buy, sign up a contract for 3 years for large amounts. How often, when your sales team are talking to them, are they asking about SAF?
It's an awful lot of the time, mainly with our corporate customers, obviously, but also a lot with our private customers, because they'll tend to own the corporates, so it's very intermingled. Really, it's helping educate the corporate teams, their sustainability teams, on how they can report on it, because when they're SBTI aligned or their GHG side, the protocol, whether or not their verifiers will even accept the SAF. So that's always a conversation. But the important thing is that because we're doing it, and we only talk about it after we've done it, we're putting a line in the sand.
Mike, you're coming at this from, well, you've been on the charter broker side, you've been on the operator side. Asia, I remember talking to one of the largest operators, and they'd said to their account managers, can you call your customer who owns the jet and ask them if they're interested in SAF? And he went to have to. And he called his Indonesian guy, and he then said to his boss, just to let you know, Indonesia's largest coal miner is not interested in SAF. How much demand is there in Asia from the business jet market?
I think today it's not huge because, again, what our colleagues have said, there's a lack of education, really, and there's no incentive, actually, from the operator to sell SAF to the end owner. I mean, there's the transparency is that we're just saying it's available if you want it, and it's at a 3-time markup in most cases if it's available. Now, there was discussions over the last 2 days about book and claim, and that seems to have had a little bit of traction in the US, but there's no sort of recognition of it yet in Asia from, at the government level of like what is the tax incentives, tax credits that you can issue, the ESG Scope 3 certificates that have been discussed today. So there's a lot of work to be done at the industry level, whether it's at the ASBAR or at IBAC in educating operators. So I think there's that missing piece, and that's where I think FlyORO come in, because by bringing a last mile blending solution, you actually have a commercial model for the FBOs to look at a markup, and therefore the emphasis becomes on the provider of the infrastructure plus the FBO to sell this product rather than the operator.
You've done well. You've got 3 acronyms in there. ASBAR is the Asian Business Aviation Association. IBAC is the International Business Aviation Council.
ICAO.
And FBO is, I'm sure everyone in the room knows,
is the private jet terminals at fixed-based operations at most airports, which are separate to the main passenger terminals.
Okay. Toby, Victor is a charter broker. People come on your site or they call you and say, I want to book a flight from London to Nice tomorrow. But you were the first charter broker to offer SAF. How successful has it been?
So to answer directly, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 6 customers of Victor.
Is that slipping? Because it used to be 1 in 5.
Correct, yeah. Truth be told, full transparency. It's about 17.5% of our clients voluntarily purchase Neste SAF when they book their private jet. So since June 2022, about 650 bookings with a voluntary Neste SAF purchase of over €1,000 is where we're at. That's how successful it is. But I think, yes, the purchasing of SAF is important, the transactional element, but I think the far more important piece, actually listening this morning, is demand signals and the whole raising awareness with the family offices, ministers, CEOs, sports teams, recording artists, and influencing the influencers, which is a very privileged position we are in as a B2C on-demand private jet company. So yeah, building up to announcing that partnership with Neste, we made it our duty to ensure that SAF was all over the customer journey. And this is really what we would like to see from more airlines and online travel agents. So whether you use the app, the website, phone in, WhatsApp, you can't really miss the opportunity to voluntarily buy SAF. And it's always opt-in when you're purchasing. So you either opt out or you choose how much Neste sustainable aviation fuel you'd like to purchase.
I think the 20% number is interesting because we did an analysis of the industry and just looked at all flight hours by people like Victor, by VistaJet, NetJets, FlexJet, and found about 20% of flight hours in business aviation are under an offsetting program already today or a SAF program. So their impact is actually being addressed already today. What I think we're seeing next is that really education hurdle. So as we start to talk to that next 20%, it's really about what's the value proposition of SAF? Why is this worth it? What's the benefit? Why would I do this? And I think we found that that's the key education piece we need to get to next. There was an initial portion of the industry that understood this, that wanted to decarbonize, and then SAF showed up as a solution for them to do so. So they've hit the go button on it. But now it's really talking to the people who don't really know, why do I want to do this? Educating them about why this is important and that we have solutions to meet it.
So do you see it splitting? You're going to have two markets. You're going to have the corporates who do it because they want it for reporting. Sorry, splitting into three. You've got the corporates who do it because they want it to report. You've got some ultra high net worth individuals who do it because they think it's right, and then the rest.
I think that's exactly right. Yep. I mean, we've seen even a split within the corporate market. So if you're an energy producer, the private jet is a rounding error to your overall corporate emissions. So you don't care. I mean, it's just, they don't even look at it. If you're financial services again, if you're insurance, those are the ones where it's 70% of your impact is now front and center, your use of a private jet. So one, it's more out there. I think, there's questions of corporate disclosures and their use of a private aircraft, how popular that is. We've gone through six different periods of time where it's been more or less popular. And now the environmental side and the disclosures you have to do with that are making this front and center again for a lot of these companies. So those are the ones I think that we've seen most engaged, technology companies, the ones you would kind of guess, would be on the front lines of this. But I think what's also interesting in our space, so in airline, in the commercial airline space, it's very clear about the airlines have a direct obligation, their scope 1 emissions, and then their passengers, this corporate travel, has a secondary and indirect obligation under a scope 3. In business aviation, we have a lot of different business models, and it turns into a spectrum of who owns the scope 1, who's responsible for it, where a corporate in business aviation, all of those emissions are actually their scope 1s. They are the airline and the customer of the airline. There is no scope 3. So for them, this is now about direct emission reductions again. It's different than their corporate buying. So we also have some education there that we have to do. I think there's another hurdle, which is GHGP and SBTI, where without that kind of certainty and guidance there, we've seen a lot of corporates just pause. So, and even ones who were using SAF already have paused waiting for that guidance. So I think that's a critical piece we need.
But I would also take it a step back. I think that's some of the reason why the industry is so nascent, because we're waiting for the customers to ask for it. So that's why we've just included it in the product. And then it kicks off the discussion to say, great, do you want to do more than what we're currently doing, which is included in the product? Great, let's talk about book and claim. And then we can educate them. I think that's the problem, especially with commercial and our industry as well, where we're just sitting back waiting, saying, well, nobody really wants it, or there's not enough, which there is enough today more than ever.
I definitely think there's a reticence from business aviation, partly because you have a slightly more complicated customer. You have people who own an aircraft to then make it available for charter, which is when Toby uses it. But if Jonathan from IAG has often talked about, this is your license to operate. And I don't feel that the business aviation market feels the same way as airlines do.
I would agree with that. But to be fair, though, you have to look at it from a geographical point of view as well. So the Western mindset, I'm afraid there's a very different mindset in Asia. So Asia, it's really going to come down to the stick first, and with some carrot incentives to bring SAF up to the levels that we all want to see. And that's coming now. Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, they're all looking at mandates, albeit 1% to 3% over the next couple of years. But that's going to be all departures, and especially on the international flights. And Hong Kong government in particular, where I'm based, they're looking to be a regional SAF hub. Most of it's going to be imported from mainland China, but that's still, I think, a good way forward is that the governments are setting the stall out, that then the corporates will follow anyway. So in Asia, it's typically like I hate to say it, but like a more rules-based system. If the rule is set, they will follow because they have to. The voluntary side, it's going to be a slightly uphill battle in Asia, whereas in Western Europe, there's probably a bit more pressure coming from non-profits and Stop the Oil and others, which are high profile, sort of giving pressure to corporates to be more voluntary.
Toby, I don't want to beat up the people on this panel because you all believe in SAF, but do you think the industry, business aviation industry, just hasn't woken up to this yet?
I think compared with 2-3 years ago, there's a lot more collaboration happening. Like Andrew, myself, Kennedy, we speak offline, discuss.
Yeah, but you're all believers.
Yeah, and the part of the reason our ratio has gone from 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 is because we're now a Middle East-owned business and we have a growing market there where there's probably less demand. I think actually one of the massive opportunities for business aviation from our perspective is very few of our customers are corporates. 95% of them are individuals. And I think if you ask the big OEMs, the Bombardiers, the Gulfstreams, they'd say the same. The majority of clients are individuals
who own businesses.
Who for sure, right? But also the vast majority of our customers, i.e. people chartering private jets, are not chartering private jets long haul. They're chartering 4 hours max, typically 2 hours. So what are these climate conscious clients who do feel bad about flying private, and they do, flight shame is a real thing, whatever wealth, there is a proportion of flyers who have that. What are they doing when they fly long haul? No airline or online travel agent has provided a transparent, credible way for their flyers to voluntarily choose to buy SAF. Now that might be Neste SAF, it could be an eSAF fund. I don't really mind, but this morning, again, a lot of times the topic comes up around, well, where are these long-term offtake agreements? Well, why don't someone far smarter than me needs to create a global fund which can be contributed, crowdfund style, by flyers who have demand for green.
To be fair, United and IAG both give you a chance to invest in their funds.
I don't think, I mean, we could do a hands up, but who has flown recently and felt like the online experience, presuming most people buy their tickets online for commercial flights, has had a fully integrated option to buy SAF in a credible, transparent way? It doesn't exist.
I think to your point, you put your $7 into the United fund and then, okay,
yeah,
that's it.
It only needs to be like 2-3% more per person. The elephant in the room is flying is too cheap. People said that earlier about emerging markets. Like, it's too cheap to fly.
Just really quickly, if I'm flying from London to Nice, how much would that cost me to charter?
20 grand for a 10-seater.
20, and if I want to add SAF?
Well, it's up to you with our product. You could spend between 150 euros and maximum probably we'd allow is like 3 grand if you were replacing 100% of the SAF.
Kennedy, do you think business aviation is not doing enough? And we should point out that FlyORO is spun off from one of the largest operators and fractional companies in the world.
Yeah, I think I would split. I think the question a little bit. I think, are they doing enough? No, I want it to be 100%. Of course. I mean, I think we want to see the whole industry really take the leadership position here. But we're doing a lot more than we were 5 years ago. When we launched the business, the education, the conversation was, what is SAF? Is it safe to use? Where is it made from? Where do I find it? It's not available. Where today the conversation is much more about, okay, how do I actually use it? Why do I use it? How do I use it, intelligently? How do I source it not for $8 a gallon, but find it in places where it makes economic sense? What incentives can I leverage? So the entire industry, I think, has done a great job educating itself, and we're having much more advanced conversations now around what it means to use SAF. But there's a range, I think, of stakeholders out there in the industry. I remember, 4 years ago, we did an initial roadshow around SAF and sustainability, and this individual comes up to me, and he wants to go on about how carbon is actually good for the environment. He goes, well, trees breathe carbon, so more carbon means more trees. Like, okay, but you don't breathe carbon. You're missing a piece here. This went on for an hour and a half that I was stuck with this guy debating whether carbon's good for the environment or not. We don't have that conversation anymore. We've moved on beyond things like that. But
let's go back to that.
There's a range of people.
Is carbon good for that? I'm joking.
Yeah. Don't make me get back on the hour and a half of why it's not. But the point is that you're dealing with a range of people in the industry. So I think we've done a great job. Leadership like what Victor and VistaJet are doing wasn't there. That's come about lately. That's shown that this is important. I think to Andrew's point, it's a little bit of the education of. This is important. We're going to do this. We're going to check this box. Here's why we're doing this, and we want you to join in farther ways. That's where some of the next work needs to be done.
Yeah, I think, our community really concentrated on the OEMs rather than the operators. So I think that was maybe, but the OEMs were a lot more advanced, so I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think, at the moment I'm helping some smaller operators. As an industry generally, I don't know Alan, maybe the facts of most operators only operate, 3-4 aircraft on average.
It's amazingly small.
Yeah.
It's like 1,800 operators in Europe. On average, they've got 1.3 aircraft or something.
Yeah, so, why would you expect them to be experts, right? So that they're not going to be. So, but I think that's where, these panels come in handy. The mandate for the EU, because they're not used to SAF, so the mandate helps them a little bit. Probably a lot of operators were panicking at the start of January because they weren't used to it, but at least it gets the conversation moving forward.
Great question. What parts of education on SAF do you have to do on your customers? And is there any appetite on advanced SAF? My gut feeling is most customers have a very rough idea of what SAF is. And if you mention eSAF, they think that comes from Yorkshire.
Yeah, you'll lose them already. I think, SAF is mainly about book and claim because they want the physical product in their aircraft. And the way we operate, we do it on an aggregated basis with our SAF. So we upload in 15 locations and then aggregated across. That gives us the percentage that because it's not available everywhere. The customers always want it in their wing though, so trying to educate them at book and claim is quite clunky, but once I spent 3 months educating one corporate. eSAF, no, people are still getting used to SAF, so I think we'll completely lose them if we crack on with eSAF, and it's not available yet anyway for the next couple of years.
Toby?
Yeah, at the dinner table next time you're around your friends who aren't in aviation, we obviously will know what SAF is, but ask them the question, do you know what SAF is? And it's surprising how few people know what SAF is. So we do a lot of education at Victor. Our marketing team is pretty integral to what they're doing, social media, newsletters, etc., the app explaining. In terms of appetite for advanced SAF, again, we want to be part of the story and tell it. We want eSAF to be less sci-fi and more real. It's a practical thing that's needed. We're going to need SAF and eSAF if we're going to get to net zero and decarbonize aviation. So for sure, using our voice, influencing the influencers. It's a broken record, but it's true, right? If the biggest recording artists in the world are seeing SAF 5 times as they check out and book flights for not just their private jet, but they fly large commercial aircraft for their B parties. This is great education playing a part. By the way, too, a lot of our clients are voluntarily paying for SAF when they book. They're then also flying on VistaJet aircraft where Andrew's not only fulfilling mandates, but also making voluntary purchases. So there's a doubling up of SAF purchasing from business aviation customers, which is great.
I think we still have to look at it as very immature market, especially in Asia and even here in the UK. There's not a lot of blending facilities, certainly not at airports. It's still sort of by GHG sort of recommending it should be done more upstream when I think it should be much more decentralized and having it, especially for business aviation, they want more flexibility. I'm sure Vista, when they are purchasing, it's a very low percentage blend. And the book and claim, yes, it's one of the tools, but I think it's a little bit of a cop-out. I think we should be trying to get physical SAF into most major business aviation high-frequency hubs. It's only really available in the major hubs in the US where California's had those incentives. And it's only now in Asia starting to become available on site. And that's where I think FlyORO wants to be, is really having that, working with the industry to have it on site at major hubs like Hong Kong, Singapore, London. Even, I think when we're talking about emerging market opportunities, I do think I agree with the earlier panelists who said Brazil, because of just the size of the fleet and the feedstock availability, nearshoring. Does make sense to be, for business aviation in particular, 3rd largest fleet in the world.
Second,
is it now? So that is a great opportunity to be investing in Brazil.
Kennedy?
Yeah, I think there's two stakeholder groups that we're talking about here. One, I think, is the industry itself, the operators in the room, the corporates that are operating aircraft themselves. Then there's the education that needs to be done to the customers of business aviation. And I think that's a little bit of what we're talking about, of how do we get our customers to understand maybe, I think it's early yet, really, to get into different types of SAF. It's really been a lot more education to SAF in general. We had a customer, one of the customers of business aviation saw one of the trucks, it said sustainable aviation fuel on it. They got off the airplane because they thought, well, I don't want to fly on this, what's this other fuel? What is it safe to use? And we had to explain, no, safe to use, jet fuel, you've probably flown on it before. I think that's been one of our big talking tracks is, most people in this room have probably flown on it without even realizing, just because of how much we blend it to these days. So that different stakeholder group, I think, is where the industry's done a great job at taking up a lot of that on its own, education on its own. I think something within commercial aviation that was an early struggle and still is one is people want a commercial air traffic to be decarbonized, but they don't want to have to do it themselves. Look at it as the airline's responsibility to do it. So when you get that checkbox of will you buy extra SAF, a lot of people aren't checking that. So I think in business aviation we're in that same dilemma, but you have more interest and ability of the operators to step up and do it.
Toby?
So just an example on the education on SAF and the complexity. So when you purchase SAF, you're reducing the life cycle emissions. So many people think SAF is burning this cleaner fuel, marginally is a little bit cleaner, but the fundamental difference is the life cycle emission reduction. And having a sales team, a brand, marketing channels that can explain how by purchasing SAF you're keeping fossil fuel underground, as opposed to burning this cleaner fuel, is an example of the complexity of educating at scale. And collectively, everyone needs to work together in order to do that. Otherwise, people just get confused.
Actually, I'm going to add the third stakeholder after thinking about that. The people who interface, I think, with our customers of business aviation, educating them as well. So we have been tracking the availability of SAF in business aviation, so at FBOs around the world. And part of our verification process has been having to call the FBO and say, do you have SAF? Because they make a big announcement that they have SAF, but then the CSR representatives don't know that they have SAF or don't know what it is or don't know how to explain it. So you'd have a lot of locations where they had SAF, but they themselves did not know they had SAF. And so that's been a real important piece of the education too.
But I think, that's why we include it in the product, right? Because we add it into the fuel tender with the Jet A1. So with the Jet A1, we'll also ask the Shell, the BPs, the other companies in Europe or the US, can you also give us a price and availability of the SAF in that location? And the blend actually is about 48%. And it's available in all the major European hubs that we fly to anyway.
And that's one of the challenges, though, is in business aviation you have far more airports are served than by commercial.
No, but I think that's where you just aggregate down to your biggest. So Le Bourget, we do a lot of flights there. There's a lot of SAF there, so we use it there.
But it doesn't make sense tankering it to Newcastle.
No, but I think that's where you need to aggregate it across your global fleet usage, right, and get to the percentage, which I can't say, that you want to. But the mandate is actually only a very small amount of our SAF usage.
So you and Kennedy are slightly enigmas where you have large fleets, or Kennedy, I know you're spun off, but you've got large fleets and Vista buys a lot of fuel. Most operators are small. You've got privately owned individuals who decide whether they're going to pay it or not in the management company. Is business aviation ever going to supply the offtake agreements that projects need?
I don't think so, just purely to the size of the aircraft, right? If you look at a Global 7500 versus an A380, it's just infinitesimal. But business aviation, if you're a small operator, you can do book and claim. Why would you wait to do a major offtake agreement when you can book and claim is right there?
So if I'm a producer in this room, I probably shouldn't waste my time trying to get money from an offtake agreement from business aviation.
I wouldn't say waste your time, but I think that's where we can work hand in hand with the commercial airlines, right? Because I'm talking to a fuel company at the moment. They want to expand in one market. I can help top them up for the commercial. So I think we work hand in hand. But I think comparing us to an IAG is just not.
Kennedy, you'd agree?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the volumes are just a totally different order of magnitude. But I think for earlier stage projects, if you have an approved fuel, but you're doing it at a smaller commercial scale, maybe that's something where they can get involved. But it's just as much of a challenge to get a 10-year offtake in business aviation as commercial aviation. Even more so because I think we have a little bit more variability to our business sometimes than over longer term scales.
Toby, you'd agree?
I would still try and have the conversation with these big global operators.
Bear in mind you have an offtake agreement with nest egg, don't you?
Yeah, but ours is more pay as you go. I think these longer term offtake agreements, if I was a producer, I would still want to speak to these guys because it would still be creating demand signal from powerful people who have potentially corporates, companies that they can then influence, etc.
Mike, you know, I'm going to say you know every operator in Asia. Have any of them shown interest in doing an offtake with you?
No, but to be fair, that's not where we're positioned, really. Our job is to provide the infrastructure, right? So to have a book and claim globally, you've got to have physical infrastructure and actually the physical SAF coming. Otherwise, book and claim could end up being a pie in the sky, really. So there's still the infrastructure piece. There's a gap right now in the market. Even if you want business aviation to do more, you have to support still, even if it's through book and claim, to pay for infrastructure. Otherwise, you're not getting the SAF uptake. You're going to have to then accept whatever the commercial side is doing. We've got no sort of input.
Okay, Kennedy, if we can't rely on business aviation for book and claim, what about investment? You have, I think Bill Gates refers to his business jet as his guilty pleasure. And he, and he has probably done more for SAF and clean fuels than any other individual. Can people in this room get investment from your customers or your customers' customers?
That's, I think, where there is opportunity, because I think we've worked to deploy investments into the space. We've seen other, family offices, especially, that have a private aircraft that have interest in deploying, climate capital, that they are willing to invest and do that. So they can underwrite it a little bit, with their offtake, or at least show that they will be a leader in that. I think that's been a push that Bill Gates has been trying to look at, of how you bring actually the use of the aircraft into some of the SAF investments that they've done. But again, it's just small, quantities, so you're not going to underwrite the whole project with just one aircraft on it.
You have also invested.
Yeah, so I mentioned we've done some investments in the space. We've done a variety of different technologies, looking at kind of what are those, beyond HEFA, the advanced biofuels, power to liquid, because I think for business aviation especially, we have to show an engagement on these advanced and future fuels. We're already in, crossroads a little bit, where a lot of opportunity, a lot of new SAF availability has been around, distilled corn oil or corn-based products. We'll see that more, I think, in the U.S. That's a harder story in business aviation than I think commercial aviation.
Are you prepared to write a check now for anyone in this room for a new project?
Find me after, yep, I got the checkbook ready.
And Americans still use checks. Andrew, investors, are you seeing any interest from your customers in investing in SAF?
I'm not sure they'd go to me to speak about that, to be honest with you, but I think our investment is using the SAF, quite frankly. 2 years ago, I couldn't get hold of it. I tried since 2018 to buy SAF. I couldn't get it. The commercial guys had already taken it all, which was great. Now there's an abundant supply, right, because of the mandates. A lot of people are falling back on the mandates. It's our job to use it, to burn it, not to. We invest in the aircraft and our infrastructure as our company. So I think that's where we're seeing the demand, really.
Mike?
Well, I mean, from a FlyORO perspective, we're about to deploy our first, full commercial long-term project in Wellcamp, I should say, in Toowoomba in Queensland, Australia, after having done the proof of concept in Seletar, Singapore with Jet Aviation for a couple of years. So we're really excited about where that's going, and I think it's just going to get bigger, because we've taken on Damon McLaughlin from Qantas, head of SAF, as of 1st of May, based in Austin, Texas, and we see US as a prime market to tackle as well.
Just take us through. Jet Aviation, for people who don't know, is one of the largest operators of business jets in the world, owned by General Dynamics, which also owns Gulfstream. They were happy to work with, at the time, a fairly small startup on proof of concept.
Yeah, I mean, for both sides, it was really, for those who aren't aware, Jet Aviation's largest footprint in Asia Pacific is Singapore, at the original airport, Seletar. And therefore, I think it's top down is really their green credentials to be carbon neutral by 2035, I think it is, as a group wide. And they're in all parts of aviation, completions, which is obviously quite carbon intensive, to maintenance, MROs, and therefore, supporting a local startup in Singapore and having the government as well supporting just seemed the right thing to do. And just for disclosure, I was working with Jet Aviation for 2 years. I just finished that contract. So I was very happy to give them advice on how to proceed this. But one I would say is, for those oil majors in the room, we won a prize back in 2022 for being the most best startup accelerator fund. And then the same oil major blocked us to distribute it in Salita because they felt threatened. So it's like, come on, guys, you need to sort of work with these startups and not just hog space.
I've heard about oil companies with corporate fleets not,
but I think it's
not paying
point,
for SAF.
And the access to the airport, downstream is really challenging for incumbents. You have to really work with the oil majors and the distributors, and they're kind of just waiting there and say, well, what's the incentive to allow you in? So those concession agreements at airports are going to be challenging.
Toby, investment from your customers?
Well, we have family offices voluntarily buying Neste SAF when they book their charter, so I assume so, yeah.
So I think that's where the dynamic has changed a little bit as well. What Andrew was saying is, 5 years ago it was impossible to find it. Now, so when we started tracking availability of SAF for business aviation, it was about 17 locations globally that you could go purchase physical SAF. Now we just passed 114. So there's still business aviation service about 5,000 airports, so 10 times more than commercial aviation. But the growth, it's almost 10x where we were 5x at least. Where we were 5 years ago in the availability of physical SAF. And then you've also had book and claim volumes come up a lot more. And with that, we've seen the price more than half, basically, for us to be able to use SAF via book and claim today than we could have 4 years ago. So the dynamic of limited supply has changed a lot, where it's really more about trying to catch up our use of it and less of a supply challenge.
Right. Any questions from the room? Okay, final easy question. Is business aviation going to be lead the way or follow airlines?
Thanks for that, Al. No, I think it's working together, right? I'm speaking to a lot of airlines now at these conferences and part of working groups. I don't think it should be a competition element. I think it needs to be complementary. And realistically, the airlines were doing it before us. We have to be honest about that. So Gulfstream, actually, we're doing a great job over 10 years ago, testing on different engines with OEMs. So I think we need to work together.
Gulfstream actually did the first transatlantic flight last year. They beat the Virgin one. Mike?
I just think it should be continually looked at as a great sandbox for initiatives for any new technologies. Come and try it in business aviation first. It's small enough to then go scale it, and the airlines might look at it even more favorably later.
Toby?
Yeah, I agree. Keep doing what we're doing, do more. We're looking at contrails now as the next step. It's a big topic. Recommending operators who are trying to mitigate contrails by changing flight paths. We can do that. It's pretty awesome. Same point, communicate, explain what they are, how they can be mitigated.
You shouldn't get Kennedy started on contrails. Kennedy?
No, I think I'm a little more competitive, I guess, than the other panelists, where I do want to see business aviation, beat commercial aviation on this. I think if you just look at the percentage of SAF that we're using much more than our pro rata share of global SAF, or as percentage of our own jet fuel usage using much more than commercial aviation is. And I think we'll keep doing that on things like contrail avoidance. The first electric aircraft is a general aviation one. I'm sure the first hydrogen aircraft will be the same. So I want to keep seeing business aviation lead that innovation, and we've done that in other ways for aviation as well. If you've ever looked at the flight deck of a commercial aircraft, look at one of a Gulfstream, and let's just look at the technology difference you see in that aircraft compared to what we have in commercial aviation. So if we can lead on technology, we can lead on sustainability.
And Kennedy's open for funding. I think my favorite comment of this whole panel, Toby, is when you went, everyone in this room knows what SAF is. If you've sat through 2 days and you don't know what SAF is, having signed up for a conference called SAF Investor, please talk to Oscar and he'll take you through it. And I'm now going to hand back to him, and I believe you've got, 2 hours of closing remarks. So over to Oscar. Thanks very much to the panel.